Our church has grown 10% in the last 8 weeks because people love the idea of getting wiser, and we've been preaching with great passion, and they know what to expect the next week. We talked about wiser in our decision making, wiser with our words, wiser at work, wiser in the workplace. All these different ways we can get wiser, you see. And people are bringing their friends. They're saying, there's fantastic sermons happening at our church. Please come, okay? I cannot emphasize this enough. We can go back and ask questions later. I also believe this community thing, this welcome and all that. All right, we're going to talk about this for a second. What is the difference? Well, let me say it this way. Here's what people who visit churches will say to you. They will say, I visited a church, A, it was not friendly. Okay, it was not friendly. B, they would say, it was friendly. But C, I didn't make any friends. Okay? So, we've worked real hard on improving our sermons at Willow, worked real hard on that. So, this welcoming idea, what makes a church feel welcoming? Anybody? Several of you said it. Church has to be accepting, has to be welcoming. What makes a church feel that way? Again, is it the lights? Is it the beautiful flooring? What is it that makes the church feel accepting and welcoming? When the people feel like they made a connection. Okay? I didn't hear that. Smile and attention, yeah. Okay. If 5 people shook your hands, 5 people, and were friendly, is that likely to cause them to come back the next week? More likely. So here's what we're doing at Willow. And I want to say this to push your thinking. Willow has a large auditorium. Okay, our worship space is very large. But just like Willow, there are sections. There are seating sections. Now, no one is seated in that far section. You're seated in this section. You guys are seated in this section. You're in this section. You're in this section. So we did this exercise about a year ago, and we said, everybody at Willow is friendly, but nobody is making friends with the people who are coming. Okay? So we were so sure of this that we started to spread some of our staff members around the auditorium. And after service, they would ask people, how long have you been coming to our church? People would say, 5 years. Great. How many people do you know at our church? Nobody. How do you come to a church for 5 years and not know anybody? They would call Willow friendly, but nobody's making friends with them. So if the couple I had dinner with last night came to this church, and you had some greeters, and they shook their hands, and they sat somewhere, and they left, they might say, a few people were friendly. I didn't make any friends, right? This happens all the time in churches. So what do we do to improve this dynamic in a church? We have assigned what we call section leaders. Section leaders, and they build a little team of people, team of volunteers. And when anybody comes in their section, okay, that section, this section, or whatever, there's about 10 people in that section who notice that they're new, who they don't assault them, they're just very friendly. And they say, where do you work? Where do you live? Is this really your first time? And could we have coffee afterwards? We have a little reception for people in our section. It'll only take 15 minutes. We have coffee and a little something to eat right in that room, just for people in our section right afterwards. Then they exchange business cards. And they say, would you mind if I gave you a call? I'm going to be sitting in this section next week. And I'll be looking for you, and maybe you could come and sit in our section again. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have another section reception, and I can introduce you to more people in our section. Now, we're doing that at one of our services. We have 3 services. The one service that we have this fully up and functioning is growing 15% faster than the other 2 services. Why? Because people who are coming are finding that these people are not just friendly, they're actually making friendships. Now, here's the beauty of this. There's a new restaurant that opened up in our community, less than a block from our church. So, and there's an Italian man who looks like he's a member of the mob. He looks like a godfather. And heavy drinking place, open late into the night, and you see all these black Cadillacs and Mercedes-Benz pulling up with shady-looking characters. You know, it's a very interesting restaurant. So I've gone there for lunch a few times, and I met the owner. And so about the 3rd time, the owner asked me, do you work in the area here? And I said, I work at that church right down the street. He said, I thought that was a college. And I said, no, it's actually just a church. And he said, well, I grew up Catholic in Italy. And I said, well, do you live in this area now? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, well, that's good. So anyway, every Thursday, I bring one of my associates, and we have lunch, and I greet this man, and we've become friends a little bit. So the colleague of mine who I take with me every week is a section leader of section 103. Okay, just a number, section 103. And we work on this section leader philosophy. So a week ago, on Thursday, as we were leaving the restaurant, I said to the owner, so what service are you coming to this weekend? He said, excuse me. And I said, well, I come to your restaurant every week. You need to come to my place once in a while. And he said, I work on Saturday night. I said, yeah, the whole neighborhood knows you work on Saturday night because there's all these mobsters here. And I said, so how about coming to our 11 o'clock service this Sunday? And he said, okay, I will. And my associate right next to me, and I didn't prompt him, he said, it's a large church. Come to section 103. He said, he wrote it down. He said, okay, 11 o'clock, 103. So when I walked out to give my sermon that weekend, I stand at the lectern, I'm looking all around, and then section 103 is over here. He's sitting next to my colleague in section 103. He's there. I preached differently. I preached with more passion. I prayed for a stronger anointing because someone far from God was in church that day. And I know that preaching matters. On Pentecost, a couple thousand people responded to the preaching, and that's what started the whole church. And when Paul would preach, it would change people's lives. Preaching matters, and if you welcome people and you make friends, you don't just welcome them, you figure out a strategy whereby you can make friends. So obviously, the next time we go to the restaurant, we're going to say to this man, so when are you coming next? Because we're friends. We go to his restaurant, he comes to our church. You see? I think these two dynamics, fantastic sermons and a very strategic friend-to-friend concept, builds churches. Now, if you're too lazy or unmotivated or you don't, whatever, you just go, that's too much work, then visitors will visit and they'll call your church friendly and they'll never come back. That's what will happen. They don't have a big issue with your church. They just never made a friendship there. And I think we got to design churches and have an infrastructure that makes friendly people make friends. However you want to do that, you do it any way you want, okay? It's exceedingly important. In the age of the internet, my BlackBerry is in my briefcase there. Do you know how few people make friends anymore? We chat, we email, we text. When do we sit down and talk like friends? And people are yearning to do that more. So, okay. Anyway, this next one, I'll bet you some of you do this, but this is really powerful. The worship, ministry, prayer thing. After every service at Willow, unless I'm catching an airplane, after every service, and once in a while I do have to catch a flight to travel somewhere, but I've made a rule, and we just had our 37th anniversary. Willow was 37 years old. And from the time I was 22, that's when I started the church, 22 years old, I decided every time I preach, when I'm done, I'm going to have someone playing the piano in the room that we held the service in. I'm going to stand down front and I'm going to minister to every single person who desires ministry, no matter how long it takes. Sometimes there's a line of 20 or 30, sometimes there's a line of 100. But if people have encountered God and they want to talk to somebody, we have to talk to them. They deserve it. So often at the end of a service, I'll say, now listen, I don't have anything important to do after this service. Some of you have very important things. I don't have any important things to do after this service, so I'm going to stand down front, and I'd love to talk with you, pray with you, serve you in any way I can. And I talk to people who have been a part of our church for 30 years, and I talk to people who this was their first time. But they love talking with someone who has just, if they've experienced something, either through friendship or through the sermon, they love ministry, personal ministry from the pastor. It's a beautiful thing. And I tell our musicians who sometimes they lead worship and then they leave, and I tell them, don't you dare leave this auditorium until the last person that I'm doing ministry with leaves. They say, can't we just play a CD? We'll just play a tape or something. I'll go, I'm not playing a CD. I'm standing there doing ministry. Do you only play your instrument when the lights and the cameras are on? Or do you use your spiritual gifts with your music while we're doing ministry?